So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Michelle Belasker. I'm the coordinator for the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. And today we're going to be hearing about effective management of knotweed in the Midwest. And really excited, we have two excellent speakers that are going to be presenting today. We have Dr. Roger Becker from the University of Minnesota and Dr. Mark Renz from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'll give each of them a proper introduction in a moment, but I just want to give a quick overview on the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. So our organization was formed in 2006. Our service area is the 9 states that you see here, as well as the province of Ontario. And our mission is to reduce the impacts of invasive plants throughout this region. We have quite a few resources available to help you with invasives plant early detection and effective management. So I encourage you to, when you have a little time, go to our website, mipin.org, and you can connect to a whole variety of resources. I've just highlighted a few things here. We have our Midwest Invasive Plant List, which actually is in the process of being updated, so keep an eye out for that. We have an invasive species control database, which is a really useful tool for those of you doing management work. We have many different species that you can select, and you can kind of filter different management techniques based on everything from your level of expertise to the habitat you're working in, the time of year, effectiveness. So it's a great tool. We manage the woody invasives of the Great Lakes Collaborative. And if you haven't been to the WIGGLE website, it's just a treasure trove of information about woody invasive plants. And we also try to provide resources and information to SISMAs or CWMAs. So we have a directory of those organizations as well as resources dedicated for them. And we have some new projects coming online this year. And we hope to even amp up the resources that we have available to those groups. So I just want to make sure I say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers. And if you want to help make sure that we can continue offering these types of webinars and similar education opportunities, I hope you'll consider making even a $5 or $10 donation to MIPIN. It really helps make sure that we can continue to offer these sorts of activities. And my contact information is here below. So if you have any questions or you want to follow up after today, please feel free. So I am going to stop sharing and invite our presenters to share their screen. So we have with us Mark Renz, who's a professor and extension weed specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He researches and extends information about biology and management of invasive plants. The research goals of his lab are centered on developing information that will improve management by improving the knowledge and understanding of invasive plant biology. He has over 15 years of experience with invasive plant management in a wide range of habitats, and his education efforts focus on providing technical information and educational opportunities for agency staff, consultants, companies, and really anyone who's interested in invasive plants. And we're proud to have him serving as the MIPIN Board of Directors. He's been in that role for many years, and we really appreciate him. Dr. Roger Becker is an extension agronomist, weed scientist, and professor at the University of Minnesota. His work revolves around weed management in annual and perennial systems, in croplands and natural areas. Some of his current projects include management of invasive plants with some expanded efforts on Canada thistle, garlic mustard, weed management processing in processing vegetables, in native and CRP systems, and studying the environmental impacts of herbicide and non-herbicide weed management systems. So you're in excellent hands. You guys can go ahead and get started.
Great. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Michelle, can you see my slides and hear me okay?
Yes, everything looks good.
Great. Well, it's especially a pleasure to talk with my dear colleague, Roger. We're in adjacent states, and I think what you're going to see today is one of the rarities when our data aligns perfectly and really agrees with some of these results. So we're going to focus on some of the research I've done several years ago and some new updated stuff by Roger later on that's going to confirm some of the results we talked about, dealing really with effective management of knotweeds in the Midwest. And there we go. So today what we're going to try and outline is just give a quick overview of the species complex we're talking about. and really dive into what are some effective management techniques and what are some key things to think about in scenarios and information. We'll spend a good half of the presentation on that. Roger's then going to talk about some of his work looking at root carbohydrate dynamics to kind of emphasize the timing of spraying that our data has shown. And he'll talk about some really new information that compares which species are easier to control. And then as time permits, we'll talk about a project we had looking at the cost and time to eradicate populations on roadsides too. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we're going to try our best to answer those if we don't answer them in the talk afterwards. So first off, there's several perennial knotweed species that exist in the Midwest. We as scientists have not made it easy because we keep changing the names of these species dramatically. So I'm just going to talk about the common names. You'll see several different scientific names in here. Pick which one you use the most, because it seems like it's an ever-changing revolving door and there's no agreement. But in the Midwest, we have the common species, or three of them. We have the giant knotweed, a Japanese knotweed, and then the hybrid of the two, which we call Bohemian knotweed. There has been some research that suggests that by far the most common one, at least in the upper Midwest, is Bohemian, although we do have populations of all three. There also are some less invasive cultivars that have been sold in the industry. One that's compacta, that's a compact version of that. We're really not going to focus on that too much. The key thing I want to emphasize in this talk is most of the work has shown that management is similar across all these species. So for most of the presentation and for the whole part I'm going to do, I'm just going to talk in general about control strategies. You'll see that all of my work has been on Bohemian knotweed, and then Roger is going to give you some hot off the press information about some of the differences with these species. We're not going to really go into a lot of detail on how to differentiate between the knotweed species because it can be really challenging. Giant has really big leaves, so it's pretty easy to distinguish from the others. Japanese has small leaves and the base of the leaf is really flat, where the confusion really arises in the hybrid because it can have a whole different range of species. So how I identify these is I look at leaf shape to differentiate giant from the other two, and then I look at height. The height can get, Japanese knotweed can get up to 10 feet tall, but the Bohemian can actually exceed. So if you see something that's excessively tall, odds are it's Bohemian, and that's been really common in our research plots. So we're going to talk about three effective management approaches: excavation, smothering or tarping, and herbicides. And note, I have a picture of a mode plot. I'm not calling that an effective management method. It's a good method to use to integrate with some of these others, but alone, the data and research has shown it's essentially not effective at all. So I want to emphasize that. So let's just go through some of these really quickly and talk about the approaches and how they're effective. Excavation has been really optimized by our neighbors over across the pond in Europe, where they have large populations, I believe, of mostly Japanese knotweed, where they're required in a lot of their areas to remove it when they're selling properties. So they have companies that they hire, that they come in with big, heavy equipment, excavate the soil, dump that soil in some type of a sifter that separates the soil from the roots, and then they dispose of these roots, and then that area is considered mostly or all knotweed free. From what I can gather from the reports I've read about this, this is highly effective. There probably is a little bit of follow-up is needed, but they've really optimized this where it can really work well. To my knowledge, this is not used in the Midwest at all because of the scale. It's really time consuming, lots of heavy equipment and specialization. Since they have it as heavily regulated and so much of it, they've really optimized this. But this is an approach if you have that equipment to adopt that. The other technique I want to talk about is smothering or tarping. And I really like this. I took these pictures directly out of a New Hampshire Department of Ag little flyer that kind of goes over this approach. This is a really effective approach. I don't want to underestimate this, so I'm going to talk about how they recommend doing it, and then I'm going to compare it to some other work where they summarize this across Europe. So this New Hampshire document says, in the middle of summer, you should go into these patches, mow down the shoots, and apply either those shoots over the stem or apply some mulch over the cut stems, then apply a tarp, a thick plastic tarp over that area. As you can see, they've kind of created an area, a ring around the outside where they've disturbed the soil that they can then put another tarp onto after that. So what they do is they cover the area with a heavy plastic, and then they make sure that heavy plastic is well attached to that area that they disturb the soil, or they could put rocks or stones or more mulch over the top of it. The key with this smothering or tarping approach that they recommend is you have to go 5 feet beyond the edge of the infestation, because it has creeping roots and rhizomes that can extend and go up, and you need to make sure they stay within that tarp area. And then you basically leave that area undisturbed so light can't get to the soil surface, and they recommend 5 years. And they've had pretty good success from what I've heard from this approach. So it's interesting, recently a summary of tarping approaches just came out of Europe. And so I just wanted to overview their comments on effective tarping and what they learned by surveying land managers and their experiences. What they recommend is obviously covering the entire stand. They found that it didn't matter if you do it in spring, summer, or fall, as long as you actually cover that entire stand. They found that if you could go beyond covering or tarping 10 feet beyond the edge of the infestation, that's really, really effective. So while New Hampshire is saying 5, in Europe, they're recommending going even further, 10 feet beyond, to deal with those rhizomes or roots popping up. They recommend maintaining it for 6 years, not 5, to maximize success. And they emphasize the use of a durable synthetic tarp. One additional idea or recommendation that they provide is to inspect this regularly to make sure that there's no tears or rips or there's some escapes coming out, because that can impact results. So again, these are some key points on tarping or smothering, really effective. It can be done on a large scale, but it's pretty time consuming and intensive on a large scale. Most of the reports I hear of its success are the images we show where it's a very small isolated patch, and we don't want to use herbicides. Speaking of herbicides, this is the third approach, and this is the area where I've done quite a bit of work, and Roger has as well. Herbicides are usually, not always, but usually the most cost-efficient method comparing these three. Depending on the herbicide you pick and when you spray it and the details, you can get 90% or greater control of that population for a year to maybe even more. Applications can be made in a whole bunch of different ways. We can broadcast them with a boom to plants. We can individually treat individual plants. We can actually inject them in the stems that are cut. And there's even herbicides we can apply to the soil surface that are then taken up by the knotweed plants. I'm just going to focus on the broadcast and treating the individual plants, because the literature out there shows that this is the most effective techniques that's most reliable. Applying to the soil surface can be really tricky and only is probably recommended in some very unique scenarios. You may be wondering and heard a lot about stem injective. That can be effective. There is some literature, albeit there needs to be more work done showing that stem injection is less effective than broadcasting or treating individual plants foliarly. And one of the challenges with injecting is it can be really easy to add too much herbicide to the area of the infestation and go over the legal limits of the amount of herbicide you can apply per unit area. So several of the reasons we don't recommend it, but there are many cases when it is a good option to be utilized. Some of the herbicide companies aren't recommending it now with their products. I'm only aware of glyphosate products that allow stem injection now, where there were some other ones previously. So we can talk about that in the Q&A if you have questions. But I want to emphasize this because people usually look at herbicides, get their pick list and how they're going to manage it, and then they look at the habitat. And I think before you even think about using herbicides, you need to think about a few key aspects. And these are really, really important because they're really going to limit your options. The first thing you need to think about is, where am I going to want to use these products? Because these products are labeled for specific areas or habitats. If you're a homeowner, there's very few herbicides that are registered for use, and really only one that I would argue is effective. In roadsides, you have a wide range of options. It's probably the most options. But if you're in aquatic habitat like a stream bank or wetland, you again have very restricted options. So you need to think of this up front because it may limit which ones you even want to look at. And then you need to also evaluate the site and think about what desirable plants are present, or if there aren't any, but you're planning restoration or revegetation, which ones, what do you plan on revegetating? Because these different herbicides have different properties that can dramatically vary and cause undue injury in some cases. Some have a long residual activity, some have short, some are safe to grasses, some are non-selective. And so understanding all of that information is really, really important before making a decision. And then I think in picking any tool, we need to think of, are we controlling acres or feet, or square feet of these areas? The size of that infestation is really also going to be really important in making those decisions. So be thinking about these even before you start thinking about which herbicides you want to apply. So when I moved here in 2006, excuse me, quickly started getting lots of controls on knotweed and how to control it. Questions that I received are, well, we're not even sure which herbicides are effective and which ones aren't. When do we apply them? What time of the year? Do we need to mow before we apply or not? And then we got all sorts of other questions about herbicide volume and other things too. And so quickly was realized that I needed to do some work on this to answer some of these questions. And most of our work was done on Bohemia knotweed, as you can see in this image. How our work was done was in small plots that were 10 feet wide by 25 to 30 feet long. We'd go in and do a bunch of treatments, and we would replicate those treatments, and then we would evaluate that control over a 1 to 2 year time frame. And that's where I'm going to show you most of those results, is based on that. And I'm kind of going to go sequentially how I went through my journey on studying knotweed. So initially, we felt very strongly that, and based on the literature, that mowing those plants before you spray was really important. So all our initial work was done where we would mow plants in the middle to late summer, let them resprout for a month, and then we had this nice canopy that we could apply these herbicides with a broadcast boom. These mow plants resprouted to 2 to 3 feet tall. It was relatively easy to do. And so all of this initial work was based on that approach. So the first thing we want to do is, what herbicides are effective if we mowed in June and then sprayed in July, so a summer application. We looked at a range of herbicides that you can see on this axis. And essentially what we found is, while some gave us some suppression after 12 months, only arsenal or imazapyr gave us control, and it was really effective control if we sprayed in the summer. So that's our only herbicide we recommend if you're going to be doing an application in the summertime. We then repeated this where we did a later summer mowing and then sprayed in the fall. And in that case, we did find success with arsenal, as we did before, was really effective at 12 and 18 months. But we also found success with high rates of Milestone, that's aminopyrrolid, and this capstone as well, which is a mixture of triclopyr plus aminopyrrolid. And essentially what we later found out is that it's really the aminopyrrolid that's doing all the work and is providing the control, not the triclopyr. So we find aminopyrrolid or Milestone and arsenal can be effective if we're applying in the fall, right around when plants are flowering, but before a hard frost. And we really liked Milestone as an alternative option compared to arsenal, because arsenal is non-selective. It has a really long residual. So we got very few plants coming back where we got effective control, as you can see on the right. Whereas when we sprayed Milestone, we did get more species that returned, and some of those were desirable grasses that survived that application and could have some benefit, and we got some other forbs too. So that was part of our thinking on liking Milestone, particularly for roadsides, where you potentially could have a lot of grass species present. We then did some follow-up work to confirm some of these, looking at some other herbicides and different rates. And again, confirm Milestone is giving us good control. I wouldn't say excellent, but good control 1 year after application, similar to Arsenal. But we also could get effective control with glyphosate. And this is why is this important? Because none of these products, Arsenal or Milestone, are registered in homeowner or urban settings. So the good news is this gives us an effective option for homeowners. Again, these applications, we mowed this in late summer and then applied these in September when they were flowering or close to flowering the re-sprouts. So that's the good news. The bad news is this rate of glyphosate is extremely high, as you'll see, 8 pounds of active ingredient per acre, which is around a 9% solution of rodeo, if you're familiar with that product. So very, very high rates to get that control, but we can get that control. We recently have done some more work looking at other products such as Method, which is aminocyclopyrrochlor on a roadside, comparing it to Milestone, and TerraView, which is a mixture of Milestone and another active ingredient called fluorpyroxafen. And without going into the details, we saw 1 year after control, Method was working okay, giving us good, not great control. And again, it was the high rate of Milestone was giving us good control and similar control with TerraView at the 2.8 and the 5.7 fluid ounce rate. Again, it's probably the Milestone in there that's really giving all the effectiveness, similar control, and the fluorpyroxafen isn't adding anything to that for control. Okay, I know I went through a lot, so let me just summarize herbicide options for these perennial knotweeds. Arsenal or Habitat is really effective. You can apply it in summer or fall. We were using right around 4 pints an acre in all our work. You'll see Roger was using similar rates. It's a really good herbicide. It's probably the best and most consistent. The downside is it's not selective and has a long residual activity in the soil. So we get bare ground for long periods after control, which may delay or prevent revegetation for quite some time. But that's probably our best tool in the toolkit. Milestone is also effective, but we need to apply those in the fall at the spot treatment rate of 14 fluid ounces per acre. And the big benefit there is it's safe to establish grasses, and you would be able to establish grasses sooner than the Arsenal or Habitat applications. Roundup or glyphosate also gave us very good control in the fall, but we really needed a high rate, that 9%, which is 2 to 3x of what a typical foliar application rate is for these products too. But it's the only effective homeowner option that we would recommend. And then Method and triclopyr products have some activity, but I think our data shows it's definitely a step below these other ones too. So then we kind of went down this path to answer some of these other questions. So we had all these experiments with mowing, and we got calls that, oh, I'm trying to control this population, but it's really far away. I can't get mowing equipment out there. Do I need to mow? And we said, I don't know. We never looked at that. So we did an experiment comparing mowed to not mowing with Milestone at 14 fluid ounces applied in the fall. And essentially, while mowing reduced the cover from 90% to 40%, what we found 9 months and 1 year after application is it didn't matter whether we mowed or not, we got high levels of control of the knotweed with 14 fluid ounces of Milestone. So our belief was, no, you do not need to mow to do this effectively. Then people came back and said, well, what rate were you applying these herbicides at? And we said 20 gallons per acre. And they said, oh, well, we heard that that the control varies depending on the volume of herbicide that you apply, and you need to apply 100 gallons per acre. And so I had some poor staff members that I had do this experiment where they mixed up exact same amounts of Milestone. So we're applying 14 fluid ounces to individual plots at either 20, 40, 60, or 100 gallons an acre, and they just would spray those until they were done. And lo and behold, what we found was it didn't matter. It's the rate of the herbicide that we're applying per unit area that's important, not the volume that we applied. We got high level of control 1 year after, whether we applied it in 20 or 100 gallons an acre. So rate volume doesn't seem to apply to be important. And then after we did all that work, we got people from out in the Pacific Northwest saying, oh man, we're getting the best control with our applications in spring. That can't be right. The fall is the better timing. So we acquiesced and we said, all right, we'll test that out in the Midwest and see what happens. And lo and behold, when we made applications in September and then came back a year later after those applications of 7 and 14 fluid ounces of Milestone, we saw high levels of suppression. When we applied it in June and then came back 12 months after, we saw no difference in control. So again, confirming spring is a bad time to make these herbicide applications. And Roger will show you some of the biology behind why. So again, if you're going to apply a herbicide, the details are really important. Applications in the fall prior to a frost, right around when it's flowering. It doesn't need to be flowering, but around that time frame has given us the best results. Arsenal is the one that you can do a little bit earlier. And you don't need to mow to obtain these high level of control. While you don't need to mow, I would emphasize that mowing is often a good practice to integrate because it makes it a lot easier to make these applications. Instead of applying to 10-foot tall plants, you're applying to 2 to 3 foot tall plants. A lot better for yourself and human safety and minimizing your exposure to these pesticides and less potential for drift. And again, we've also found higher volume doesn't improve control. So when we're looking at herbicides recommended, I think the top 3 would be imazapyr, aminopyrrolate, and glyphosate, as you see here. But again, remember, we have to look at the properties of these. Arsenal or imazapyr and glyphosate are not selective herbicides. So if you have desirables there, they'll probably be impacted. While Milestone is safe to establish grasses. Then we also have to look at the residual activity. Both imazapyr and aminopyrrolate have long residual activities that could impact revegetation, while glyphosate has none. And then both imazapyr and glyphosate can be used in aquatic or near aquatic scenarios. They have formulations that can be, while Milestone cannot. I do also include method and triclovir products and some rates for recommended. These rates are from Roger's research. I think these would be probably options that I would pick if these top 3 weren't available, but they also have benefit in deciding what to use. Okay, so I went through a whole lot here. I'm going to now pause it and turn it over to Roger, and he's going to talk about some of his work that he's done and how it relates to perennial knotweed control. Roger, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I might be senior to Mark, but I'm not senior in the scholarly activities he's cranking out. So a lot of good information coming out of Wisconsin there. We always get these questions in the herbicide industry. Well, what if, or what about? So, and a lot of these products hadn't been compared to each other. It's kind of hard to do small plot trials on these things on a large scale. So we developed a pot method to look at various products and try to compare different rate titrations just to get a kind of an update of products that might be available. And the list, you don't need to get all this detail, but they're grouped by the mode of action. That's what the numbers are. And as you go down the list, you see the phenoxies, the glyphosate, kind of a standalone mode of action, the Arsenal, imazapyr, etc. Mark has the cursor, so he has control over me for once in his life. And as you go down that list, you just see there's rate titrations, and the thought being just to get a look, see what would the other products do, and are we using the ones that we think we should be using, as the last. There aren't other products that might work better. Go ahead and next slide, Mark. So the results of all of that basically confirm what Mark's been telling you. If you look to the left on that slide, at the bottom, it highlights the group LSD comparisons. Those all were equal in performance. And if you look through that list, there's Tordon, which is effective. That is a high rate of Tordon. And you can't use that possibly in your area if you're east of the Mississippi. And there's other issues with that, but that's an old standard that we wanted to look at the analogs of picolinic acid groups, like Milestone came from that lineage. So we're just curious what that might do. And as you look through that list, Garlon, those are high rates of Garlon. And the thought being, if you're out controlling brush and you happen to have Garlon in the tank, and that's probably a 4 ultra, and you're not in aquatics, you could spray the population of knotweed that you might come across, and it gave very good results. The question being the staying power of that's not confirmed yet. Spike is something, tebuthyron is an old soil applied product. So strictly soil uptake, you would dose the soil around the plants. And that works well for us on things like prickly ash and Siberian elm and some other plants that we have issues with. So if you're out there doing those things, that would work well. And it is a soil uptake product. Milestone, what Mark said, works well. And Habitat, which is the more natural areas labeling for arsenal. The rates, a lot of those rates, we got down to 32 ounces and still got good performance. And the last group would be the next group of products that came along, and fluroxapyr is starring. And that's that picolinic, it's a fluorinated product. And if you come across, you're doing brush again, and you come across some knotweed, it does have reasonable activity. And you can see the Roundup, that's a 5-pound gallon. So it's a pretty high rate, but it does have a little more inconsistency. And if you go through that list, just lower rates of Habitat and Star Rain again shows up. Method, outside of that group is Method. As Mark said, Method can give you activity, but it's not one of the stronger products out there for this treatment. And the rest of them just kind of fell out of the wayside. So we are probably using the right products. Next slide, Mark. And the question comes up on carbohydrates. I started my career in weed science looking at hemp dogbane, which was running amok in the Midwest, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa in the 70s. And I, being a guy that can't learn from his past mistakes, I thought I should do that again. So I looked at the carbohydrates of knotweed, and statistics says, we looked at 3 sites. There are 2 populations of Bohemica, one of Japonica. Stats said you should leave them separate, but advance, Mark, to the next slide. Because biology makes more sense when you group them all together. And at the top, you have the phenological stage, emergence, vegetative, reproductive, etc. And just these are non-structural carbohydrates. So this is what a herbaceous perennial uses to produce all that photosynthetic architecture every year. And if you look at the dip, the bottom of those bows are basically June through the end of July. And that's when the plant reaches this maximum biomass produced above ground. So that photosynthetic architecture is what it takes a lot of the carbohydrates out of the crowns. These are dry weight carbohydrate levels in the crown. So this is what's being utilized and depleted to produce that structure that it has to produce every single year. And it all switches as it did in dogbane. We did this in loosestrife, herbaceous perennials. That switch where you start to build up that underground root reserve happens when the flowers start, when you hit that reproductive phase. And for us, the knotweed reproductive phase starts in late August. It's typically, and it changes based on temperature, but it's probably pretty photoperiod driven. But for us, August, and it really goes full guns in September. So that's your sweet spot. Carbohydrates are moving down to the crowns, and systemic herbicides would move best with that carbohydrate flow. So that's why Mark showed you the slides of Milestone control in the fall being more efficacious. Habitat with all that soil uptake might work well anytime. If you get a high enough rate, that soil uptake is not so dependent on translocation, but the translocation helps on that one. But systemic things like Milestone and Roundup for sure that fall application. And the sweet spot is to the right side of that little window, because at the end of when the flowering's winding down is when you get the most movement down to the roots. Some of that material goes to the metabolic site, which might be production of flowers. So the later part of that flowering period is probably the sweet spot. The challenge is this thing does senesce fairly early compared to some other herbaceous plants, but that's the window of opportunity. If you're going to go out there and try to cut it, you don't get too excited about getting out there right away. The things starting emerging in April in Minnesota, towards the mid-April, and they go great guns. But just sit back, have coffee, relax, wait for it to get to that just beginning to the flowering stage, and then cut it. And you're going to do the most damage to that carbohydrate root system. So if you have a very small patch and you want to just cut it in July, and then come back and cut it maybe 40 days, 30, 40 days, and then 30, 40 days, do that for a couple of years, and you might run it out of gas. If you don't repeat that, it quickly recovers. So if you just cut it once, it's not going to care through the season. So carbohydrates, it's just interesting biologically what they're doing and how you might manipulate that carbohydrate use for your own management goals. Next slide. And flowering is quick. I planted patches on campus of giant japonica and bohemian, and the flowering of the female japonica that we had started around September 1. The buds are just initiating. Next slide. And they really started to develop what you could see as achenes or seeds within that flower structure around mid-September. Excuse me. And next slide. And then by the third week of September, they're pretty much developed and they're already mature by the end of September. So it's a quick window. So that reproductive phase is quick.
I'm just going to go through this really quickly, and because I'm sure there's plenty of questions. We did some work trying to see if we could eradicate knotweed on Wisconsin roads and tried to evaluate the cost. We were using Milestone applied in the fall after mowing, and we did it at 8 different locations. For the sake of time, I'm just going to show you some pictures and go through it quickly. Initially, what we did is we went in and mowed, came back and sprayed in the fall to these resprouts, as you saw. We treated all those sites, and we estimated that cost us around $20 per 1,000 square feet in time and herbicide. And as you can see, we came back in the second year, things looked pretty good. We had good, not great control. There was a wide range of escapes, as you can see here. So what came back in, and we spot treated all of these with Milestone at 14 fluid ounces in the fall. We didn't do any mowing because it wasn't needed. And then we came, and that rain gave us, we estimated that was giving us modest but not excellent control. We retreated all those, and it cost $4 per 1,000 square feet. And then the third year we came back and did that again. It looked even better, but we still had some escapes. Our control was around 87% among the 8 sites. And many of the sites we deemed the cover was so little we didn't actually retreat. So the cost was much, much less, around $1 per 1,000 square feet. So if we look at the cover over this 3-year time frame, we see what you would expect. We reduced it somewhat, not as much as on our control trials on Roadside. So we still had lots of cover after that first treatment. But after that spot treating that, we got it down to really low amounts at 10, and it kind of stayed at that time frame when we ended it in the 3rd year. It was expensive to treat these. It was almost $20 per 1,000 square feet in the first year, but then became much more reasonable for product, and really it was time that it cost us to accomplish this task. I think some of the lessons we learned from this approach was that, to our surprise, on these roadsides, there really was limited vegetation that was growing underneath the knotweed. We were expecting to see some grasses take over and be competitive, and we just didn't see it, even though we were treating with Milestone. And when we did get vegetation that established, it wasn't what we wanted. As you can see here, we've got some creeping Charlie, some Canada thistle, and other rural weeds that aren't desirable for our roadsides as well. So that was a negative that we learned about that. So just to sum things up, this portion of the study showed that knotweed can be suppressed, but you're going to need to go at it for more than 3 years. Even with effective herbicides, we weren't able to eradicate it after 3 years. And so that's something to be aware of. There are a range of herbicides, but some may not be as effective, so select those herbicides carefully. If possible, starting with a small versus a large infestation is recommended. Prevent, early detection, rapid response will probably be a lot more effective with these control techniques. And like with any other invasive plant management approach, we heavily recommend developing a plan that's long-term, that allows for eradication and revegetation too. I think it's no different with knotweed as it is with many of our other invasive species. With that, I'd like to thank everyone that helped with this project and our efforts, and thank Roger for all his hard work, and open it up for questions if we have time. I think we saved some time for questions.
Yeah, I think we have time. I think we technically we're done it after the quarter hour, but if people are willing to stay on for a few minutes, we really just have maybe about 4 to 5 questions here. There was some interest in knowing more about the research coming out of New Hampshire and Europe. I don't know if there's a place where people can find that, or if that's something you can put in the chat.
Yeah, there's a lot of I'm not aware of any new research out of the East Coast. The work that I was summarizing and mentioning, I think was done several years ago. So I'm not aware of new work from the East Coast. Roger, are you aware from any new work in the East Coast?
I'm not either, Mark.
Yeah. I think Europe has done a really good job of summarizing and doing having research articles that summarize effectiveness. My experiences, those are all available for free. So if you Google like Japanese knotweed, control Europe, I think all of those will come up. They're looking much more at the non-chemical approaches, although they are using herbicides. So I'm not aware of anything like earth-shattering new. It's more of summarizing some of these existing techniques and approaches. Roger, do you have, or maybe do you want to talk about the biocontrol? Because that's something we didn't mention.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Some psyllids have been released in the US, but I haven't been tracking. That was it 4 years ago? Around that time at 4 sites for initial releases, and they're doing the monitoring to see what they do and stuff. Fritzy Rested in Oregon has been leading that effort. That's going to be a slow burn. It's going to be a long haul to get those things to really start to impact, but it is a biocontrol release, and they have been released in North America. So that's something to watch as we move forward in the future.
Yeah, and I would just emphasize, if you are interested in biocontrol releases, talk with your state Department of Ag. Often permits are needed to gain access, and they sometimes allow or don't allow certain biocontrols. I think, as Roger mentioned, they're only out in the West is where those psyllids have been released, correct?
Yeah, well, I think Barron's might have one in the Northeast, but I'm not positive on that. But there, to my recollection, there were 4. It's the early stages where they do a caution. They're doing initial releases just to see what they do and how do you do it, etc. To my knowledge, it's not for general release yet, but hopefully soon.
And there was another question about, I think, thinking about treatments by homeowners. Some of those high rates of glyphosate, are those allowed by the label?
So that's a great question. So if you're a homeowner and making an application and you want to choose an effective herbicide, I would recommend glyphosate, and that's really the herbicide of choice that I would recommend. These labels can be tricky, and glyphosate gets really, really tricky because there's different concentrations that they're sold on. So you got to read the label and see what the label says, and really in order to apply the same amount that we're applying, you need to look at the pounds of active ingredients or acid equivalents. And it's really complicated, and I apologize for how complicated it is. But depending on the label, many of those will allow for those like 9% solutions treatment. That's often a lot of those labels are associated with controlling woody invasives. And I don't know if you know, Roger, what the maximum label rate, but there's some high rates that can be applied on many of those glyphosate labels, correct?
Yeah, and when you get like brush where you're treating, you can spot treat up to, is it 8 or 14 pounds on a per acre basis of no more than 50% of any given acre, that kind of stuff. Homeowners wouldn't run into that, and they hopefully don't have enough of a patch that they'll get too carried away. One thing that always comes up is a lot of the big box store formulations are only 8% active, or sometimes 18, and the commercial things are typically 3 pounds acid equivalent to 4 pounds acid equivalent, 4 or 5 active ingredient. So they're much higher. So that's where people might get tripped up going to the home use. But I agree, home use glyphosate is still the handiest thing and least likely to get you into trouble. Arsenal and you showed a lot of trees. Wisconsin has a lot of trees, and the arsenal, when you start getting those higher rates and you treat very much with the residual, you do worry about being near trees with that.
Absolutely, and we have a case of people treating knotweed with, or it was actually an organization treated knotweed underneath oak trees with arsenal, or imazapyr. It wasn't arsenal, it was a different formulation, and they severely damaged those oak trees where many of them had to be removed. So there are some formulations that contain, for homeowners, that contain imazapyr. I would never recommend that to a homeowner, because if you kill one of those trees, you know, that's going to be just an awful scenario. So that's one of the reasons I stick with glyphosate that doesn't have residual activity.
Okay, we still have new questions rolling in, so I did put my email in the chat. So if anybody wants, you know, wants to email me, and I can sort of maybe relay some questions after the fact. But let me, one last herbicide related question, then just a couple ones on mechanical treatment. Is there any issues with herbicide resistance that you've seen?
Yeah, I saw that one come up. So no, to be brief, I think we're having lots of issues with herbicide resistance in ag systems and turf systems, where we're applying herbicides every year, and we've been doing it, the same herbicides for 20 years or 5 years without rotating any herbicides or any other management. These knotweed plants, they're not being treated every year. We're lucky if we can treat them in consecutive years, and they're resprouting from clonal tissue. So there's, without going into all the details, there's very low risk of herbicide resistance based on what I've seen. Roger, do you agree with that?
I agree. You'll get people thinking maybe they're resistant because they're hard to kill, and you got that persistent rhizome system that you got to take out, which will take time just to get the stuff translocated through there. So you'll get thoughts that, well, maybe it's resistant, but it's somewhat tolerant and difficult to kill, but it's not resistant. I agree, Mark.
Okay, we'll make this the last question, but it's kind of a two-parter. So there was a comment about, is any physical disturbance of knotweed bad because it stimulates, the message has been like any cutting will stimulate exponential growth. What is your opinion on that? And then there was also someone who referenced a Connecticut group called Nix the Knotweed that recommends repeated cutting over a season, and they wanted to know your opinion on that method as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think our experience is the benefit of cutting, it makes that follow-up application or methodology easier to do, safer for the applicator and safer for the environment, and potentially use less herbicide. The risk with cutting, if you just cut alone, is you will get resprouting. And a great example is we had some plots that we mowed twice in the year, and by fall we had 100% cover. The next year we saw no difference from areas we didn't mow at all. So that repeated mowing needs to happen, like Roger said, 2 to 3 times a year, probably for 3, 5, 7 years to see really a large impact, because they have such big root reserves. I think the only reason concern about mowing that I have is if you're mowing and you're transporting those cut stems off the sites, there is a potential for those to reroot and spread. Although I think it's a low chance. There is still a chance, but I'll let Roger give his 2 cents.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, Mark. Just a thing of interest, an easy way to regenerate these for clones for research is to use stem cuttings and root cuttings. If there's a lot of moisture and the things aren't desiccating, they definitely can germinate or start new roots at the nodes of those stems. So just take cautions when you get rid of material that you've collected. Where do you take it? That's a different story. We're not going to answer that one. We've been in long discussions with Minnesota pollution controls compost sites and things in Minnesota, and there's some issues there. But if you can get a high enough temperature, long enough period of time, and or just desiccation, it'll take care of that. But there's policy-wise, it's still a questionable thing.
Roger, I know I spent I was on vacation on the East Coast, and the East Coast even more so. We're starting to see it now in Wisconsin. You see, like on the road, you see a patch of knotweed, and then you go 100 feet, you see another patch, then another 100 feet, another patch. Do you think that's from them mowing and the stems rerooting, or do you think that's from spreading like the rhizomes through like rhizomes getting caught up in the mower and moved downstream? What do you think is causing that periodic movement?
So back to the student, Alice Drazen's work shows that seed generation from seed is much more prevalent than we had thought. But you do have to have a male-female plant in with probably a pollinating distance, which based on other species is probably 100, 300 feet. You do need to have a pollinating source. So that would be one thing to worry about. If you got a lot of patches around, they could be clonal patches. But if the male and females are commingling and Japonica and Giant are around, or just Bohemian and Japonica are breeding back. So there's more seed spread than we think. That'd be a tough one to get started. It's not easy for them to start, but you get enough of them. But a lot of that is probably fragmented shoots. Any of them are concerned, so just pay attention and take up any of those satellite populations like you mentioned, Mark. Get out there early when you see a satellite population started and get it under control.
Yeah, that's great to bring up the seed. We do find viable seed in Wisconsin as well, so it can produce viable seed. How and is a factor. My 2 cents is if you have to cut, just leave it on site, pile it up in a very specific area. And then if it reroots, it's controllable, right? And if you can burn it, great. If not, just let it sit there and degrade. We haven't seen a lot of rerooting when we've done that with our experiments. But put it in a controlled area where you can monitor it would be my advice.
I would absolutely agree. That's the best way to do it on site.
Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today. Thank you both so much for sharing all this information. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank Mark. Thank everybody for tuning in.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.